further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Amy Hupe.
Hello. Luke's introductions get more unhinged every time he introduces me. So yeah, I'm going to be talking to you today about burnout. So you know who I am because you've just been told, but my name's Amy, and if you haven't encountered me before, congratulations. And so yes, for those of you that don't know me, I am a content design and design systems consultant based in the UK. And as Luke mentioned, I've worked on design systems for these people, so for gov.uk, for Babylon Health, RIP Babylon, for BT, which also includes EE and PlusNet, for Springer Nature, and most recently for the Wellcome Trust. And Zeroheight told me that I'd been asked to speak last today because they hoped that I would bring something kind of light and funny to the end of the day. So yeah, I've decided to talk to you about burnout. Lol. I can't function anymore. Oh, how we laughed. So I do want to mention before I start that Lauren Lowe-Prett gave an amazing talk about this at Clarity 2021, and the video is on YouTube. So if you do want to go and hear more about this subject in a slightly less incoherent and unprofessional manner, then I definitely recommend that you go and give it a watch. But let's get into it. So a few weeks ago, I was at Smashing Conf in Freiburg. Was anybody else here there? No? Oh. So I saw a designer called Christine Valor give a talk about responsive design, and in the talk she introduced a German concept which I had never heard of before, called Sisyphus Arbeit. And I am probably butchering that pronunciation, so sorry about that if you're German. But it means the work of Sisyphus. And if you're not familiar with the story of Sisyphus, then I will explain. So, in Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a king who was punished in the afterlife for his deceitfulness, and his eternal punishment was to roll a large boulder up a hill, only to have it roll back down every time that he reached the top. And this task was repetitive and futile and a never-ending and ultimately meaningless effort. And I'll tell you now that when Christine explained this, my head snapped up so fast that I almost got whiplash. Because Sisyphus Arbeit, I realised, as I sat there in that conference hall surrounded by about 300 Germans, was the best description I'd ever heard about a career in design systems. So, full disclosure, I am currently giving this talk to you from the very depths of my own burnout. It's been a pretty trying year for reasons that I'm not going to go into detail here, but to quote Succession, if anyone likes Succession, it's been quite the shit show at the fuck factory. So, with that said, this is not the first time that I've had these thoughts about design systems work. So if you came to Converge last year, you'll have heard me compare those of us working in design systems to salmon, kind of swimming upstream against this powerful current of opposing forces that seem determined to drag us back towards our start point. And the thing is that I know that I'm not the only one who feels this way. So when I talk to friends and colleagues, lots of people in this room working on design systems, are we having problems? Should I stand very still? Okay. So yes, when I talk to friends and colleagues working on design systems, I hear this kind of one reflection over and over again, which is, this shit is exhausting. And recently, I have started to think about why this is. So what exactly is it about design systems in particular that leaves so many of us feeling really depleted and burnt out? Is it something to do with the context that we're working in? Or is it the nature of the work? Or is it something about those of us who are drawn to this work that demands kind of systems thinking, that makes us kind of prone to burnout? And more importantly, is there actually anything we can do about it? Because the bottom line is that as much as I do often feel really exhausted by this work, I actually do like it. Even though it kind of frustrates me and it exhausts me, there is a reason that I keep doing it beyond just being a glutton for punishment. I just wish that it was a bit easier. And I think that that's probably true for all of you too, otherwise why would you be here? So in the next half an hour or so, I'm going to try and share some reflections on why I think design systems have the potential to burn us out, and some ideas about what might make things better. So people talk about burnout a lot, and I think often it's used quite flippantly. So I want to start off with the definition of burnout, just to make sure that we're all on the same page about what it is. So the technical term, I think, was first coined by a psychologist called Henry Freudenberger in 1975, and he characterized it by these three components. So the first one was emotional exhaustion, which is the fatigue that comes from caring too much for too long. The second one was depersonalization, which is the depletion of empathy, caring, and compassion. And finally, we have a decreased sense of accomplishment. So this unconquerable sense of futility, feeling that nothing that you do really makes any difference, which is just like Sisyphus' Arbeit, right? So when it comes to design systems, I really think that it's this third component that most commonly leads us to burnout. And why is that? Well, I think there are kind of 5 main reasons that design systems contribute to this decreased sense of accomplishment, which leads to burnout. And they are that we and the organizations that we work for tend to overvalue outputs over outcomes, that design systems are still viewed as static products, not living services, that design system value is actually really hard to quantify in the way that's often expected, that we hear a lot more about our failures than our successes, and lastly, that we care too much about too much. So let's talk through each one of those. So, overvaluing outputs over outcomes. Now, I think as the design system space has matured, we have worked really hard to try and converge on this kind of idea and a standard definition of what they actually are. And in doing this, we've started to treat them like this kind of checklist of things to deliver. And as a result of this, I see this real kind of overemphasis on artifacts and deliverables and things that you can kind of point at and be like, we made that, at the expense of what design systems really are, which is organizational practices. And one common way that I see this manifesting is in this phenomenon that I see in design system teams over and over again, something that I like to call the post-launch crash. Now, pre-launch design system teams are typically kind of galvanized towards this shared and very specific aim, which is to launch the design system. And during this time, the team has its collective eyes on this shared prize, and any and all work and discussions and disagreements and stresses and detours that happen during this phase kind of happen in this warm glow of this very bright light at the end of the tunnel. However hard things are now, we think, it will all be worth it in the end. And I've been through this myself a few times. And the first time was this time. So this is a picture of me and the team at GDS on the day we launched the WK design system back in 2018. I think there's a couple of you in the room here. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this was probably the best day of my career. So we'd spent 18 months doing kind of research and design and redesign and documentation and testing and iterating and failing and eventually passing our funding review. And it all came to fruition on this day. And the relief was unbelievable and only surpassed really by the kind of pride that I felt at what we had managed to achieve. Twitter went nuts. So design and tech heroes of mine were sharing our work and were praising this thing that we'd created. And any exhaustion that I kind of felt in that moment was swept away in this flurry of excitement and recognition and glory. It was great. It was indeed all worth it in the end. But what I know now, what is so obvious in hindsight, is that the launch wasn't really the end. It was only actually the beginning. And it was the beginning of something that I now know is endless and relentless and really hard, and that the light at the end of the tunnel turned out to only be the entrance to another one, and a much kind of darker, more difficult tunnel. And for many design system teams, that light at the end of the tunnel is the only one that they really get. So giddy from this kind of euphoric moment of going live, I see many design system teams kind of breezing confidently into this post-launch land, ready to just bask in the glory of their efforts as teams start to adopt the design system and incorporate it into their day-to-day work. Unfortunately, it's at this point, as teams start to kind of kick the proverbial tires of what we've done, and stakeholders start to ask, what's next? that we often come to realize that the people in our organization have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of what we're offering. So, demand surges, we are bombarded with reports of all the gaps in our system, and stakeholders start to question whether our team even needs to exist anymore now that we have built the thing that they were expecting. And this leads me straight into the second reason that I think design systems cause burnout, which is that design systems are still seen as static products, not living services. So although awareness of design systems has definitely matured significantly over the last kind of decade or so, a continued sticking point seems to be around organizations understanding the need for continuous investment. And this is absolutely not helped by external agencies and consultants, and I really do my very best not to be one of them, who promise to come in and build you a design system. As an aside, if you are here as an external consultant or an agency who does this, please, on behalf of in-house teams across the land, stop. This is like promising to build a national rail service without really giving thought to who's going to drive the trains once the tracks are in place. Design systems are a continuous service to an organisation, and services come with ongoing operational costs and accountability needs. But the idea that design systems are single-point deliverables is a pervasive myth that just won't die. Is there anything I can do about that?
I don't think so.
No, it's just going to happen. Okay, it's fine. And while I know I'm preaching to the converted here, I do think there are two aspects to this that contribute to burnout. So the first is that product teams using the design system will often place really unrealistic demands on a design system team to provide everything that they need from day one. As design system makers and maintainers, we know that our design systems grow and evolve over time, right? And we know that the gap between what teams need and what we're able to offer will shrink as the system matures. That rather than solving every need from day one, our task is to reduce duplication of effort as time goes on. But for people who've never worked on a design system, this isn't always as obvious to them as it is to us. And rather than seeing the design system as this kind of living entity with ever-increasing returns, they focus on the gaps. And this leaves us facing this kind of fire hose of demand that can make us feel as though nothing we're doing is ever enough. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a few minutes. But the second problem that this misconception causes is that it creates this threat to our funding that I think lots of teams face. So stakeholders who kind of misunderstand the evolutionary nature of design systems can assume that once we've shipped version 1, we are no longer needed. Budget holders who don't understand the need for us to provide ongoing support to add to and to update the system and to run processes like contribution and provide support are quick to assume that they can just reallocate our time to other more pressing matters. And no matter how many times we explain how things really work, this misunderstanding seems persistent, and it leaves us in this position of constantly having to defend ourselves and prove our worth. And this constant need to explain why we're doing what we're doing is valuable, is exhausting, and it really feeds into that feeling of futility, that nothing that we do is ever good enough. And it's also really challenging. And that's because of the third reason that I think design systems cause burnout, which is that design system value is really hard to quantify. Even in organizations with the most supportive, trusting leadership, it's not enough really to just say, trust us. We are delivering value. Eventually, someone is going to say, prove it. And despite a ton of kind of articles and conference talks and regular discussions and panels and things with each other on how to effectively measure the impact of design systems, most of us still find this inherently hard to do. And I think that there's a few reasons for this. So, for starters, it is actually relatively easy to gather qualitative feedback about the value of our design systems, like testimonials and anecdotal benefits from people who use and like it. But the trouble is that it's often not really what the business wants from us. Because what that stakeholder usually means when they say prove it is prove it with numbers. If it's money that you want, then give me something that I can attach a clear cost to. And when it comes to gathering quantitative data, there are two areas we can look at, and neither is particularly straightforward. So the first one is to look at our impact on the user experience of the products that are built using the design system. And we might ask things like, have we helped to increase conversion? Or has our customer satisfaction score improved? Or has engagement gone up? Or are product updates happening more frequently now? But this presents a real challenge for design system teams because our impact on the end user experience is always diluted and mixed in with other factors like product teams' delivery processes or the efficacy of other systems and resources that those teams use or just the overall health of design and development processes within our organizations. So pinpointing to any degree of accuracy or usefulness a design's impact on quantitative product metrics is an unwinnable game, but it is often one we are asked to play anyway. Our second option is to collect metadata about the design system itself. So that's things like the number of teams using the design system, or the number of components used, or the percentage of our product UI that is built using the design system. And these things are definitely easier to measure, but they're only really meaningful if stakeholders fundamentally already believe in the value of our design system, because nobody really cares about the whole company using something that they don't see the point in. This isn't an easy problem to solve. So, to my knowledge, nobody has found a kind of universal successful formula for persuading stakeholders to keep the money coming in. The best that we can really do is try and understand what our organisation and our leadership cares about and build a picture that taps into that. But it's not much fun, is it? Making the case for continued funding is difficult, it's tiresome, and it's probably not why most of us got into this work. But it is inescapable. And again, I know I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I do think it's worth acknowledging because it all contributes again to this decreased sense of accomplishment. This can make it feel like we're speaking a different language to our stakeholders and our users, because we might know that what we're doing is helping, and we might know that we're working as hard as we can. But if we can't tell that story in a way that people want to hear it, then it feels like nothing we're doing is good enough. And this leads into the fourth reason that I think design systems cause burnout, which is that we hear way more about our failures than our success. So I often hear people talking about design systems as thankless, and I definitely understand where that comes from. As design system maintainers, as I said before, we are providing a service to our organisations. And as with any service, people are way more likely to tell us when we're getting it wrong than when we're getting it right. And this is actually completely normal, but it somehow feels more personal when the customers that you're serving are also your colleagues and your peers. I think that subconsciously we kind of expect designers and developers that we're working with to take time to give us good feedback. The fact that they know, on some level, what it's actually like to do our jobs makes their silence on our successes feel kind of inhumane. But here's where I'm going to say something a bit strange. You know how they say, no news is good news? If we apply this to design systems, we can assume that if we're not really getting any feedback, then it means that everything's working as expected and our users and our stakeholders are satisfied. But I also think in the case of design systems, that bad news is also good news. Since the overwhelming majority of design systems are not mandated, that means that we are reliant on teams in the organisation choosing to use them over alternatives like creating their own product-level solutions or, in the worst cases, creating their own local design systems. So when teams come at us with feedback like, oh, this header component only has space for 4 nav items, but we have 5, or your focus states don't work properly in Safari, or I tried to contribute a pattern, but nobody came back to me, or we use a different theme on this part of the website and your tokens don't support it. I see this as a sign that teams are engaged and on some level that they are invested in our success. Because if they're taking the time to tell us how to make the system better, it's because they want it to be better. It's because they want to use it. Or at least rationally, that's what I do. But the problem is, we're not robots. However, our logical brains might process this as a positive indication. We are human beings doing our best, and constant criticism doesn't feel very nice. And this creates a kind of unfortunate paradox. Because as engagement and buy-in and usage of the system increases, so too does the amount of criticism that we receive, constructive or otherwise. And that means that the more impactful our design system is, then the more we're going to hear about its shortcomings. Our success is going to make it feel like we are failing, almost by design. And as well as being kind of demoralizing, it also makes it really hard to prioritize. When goodwill and trust is our currency for encouraging adoption, it makes it really hard for us to put these issues on ice. And this moves me on to the fifth and final reason why I think design systems cause burnout, which is that we care too much about too much. As systems thinkers, we are hardwired to keep our eye on the big picture and all of the problems that that picture contains. And this creates a couple of issues that I think can significantly erode our sense of progress. So firstly, we understand that our design systems are made up of lots of interconnected parts, and that even seemingly small decisions that we make could have consequences for its overall health. We know that design systems are multipliers. And so a single design choice that we make can quickly get scaled across multiple products. And if we get it wrong, then rolling back on that choice creates widespread disruption to adopting teams and can weaken trust and weaken our connection with those teams. And that is a really heavy load for us to bear. And in my experience, this tends to make us quite cautious and fairly risk-averse, meaning that we often take our time to really build confidence in decisions before making updates. And that's not a bad thing. To some extent, design systems need to move at a slower pace than product teams because of the scope and the scale of their work, but it can go too far. So I've worked in teams where we've as good as kind of ground to a halt because we're scared of making a misstep. When we see every single move that we make as having the potential to cause far-reaching disaster, we stop making progress altogether. And another problem that we face is that being aware of all of the problems means also being aware of all the problems that you're not solving. So the breadth of the work that we're doing means that there is pretty much an endless supply of issues to fix and improvements to make. And I do think that as system thinkers, we are especially kind of empathetic and especially sensitive to the pain of saying no, even though we know it's necessary. Even if we know that we can't be everything to everyone, I think that we're kind of hardwired to want to. In fact, I would say that it is the very qualities that make us good at our jobs, so our empathy, our problem-solving skills, and our ability to hold the whole picture in mind, that make us so vulnerable to burnout. It makes me think about this meme, which says, do what you love, and you'll work super fucking hard all the time, with no separation or any boundaries, and also take everything extremely personally. I am in this meme. And this worries me because I think that for many of us, the things that attract us to this work in the first place, so this desire to help people, to have an impact, to make a difference, those can be the things that end up driving us away from it. So is it really any wonder that so many of us are burnt out, given that, just to summarize, we overvalue our outputs over outcomes, meaning we're facing this never-ending checklist of things to deliver? That our design systems are seen as static products, not living services, and this creates unrealistic pressure to have everything done from day one. Given that design system value is really hard to quantify, so it's hard for us to tell our story in the right way, which makes it feel like what we're doing is never enough. That we hear more about our failures than our successes, so it feels like we're never getting anything right. And given that we just fundamentally care too much about absolutely all of it and everything else, wishing that we could just solve all of the problems, being painfully aware of what it is that we can't fix. So on that cheery note, is there anything we can do about it? I've just spent the last 20 minutes or so making the case that design systems are destined to burn us out. So should we all just quit right now? Well, you could quit. Although if anyone is here with their boss, if you could just wait a couple of days, it doesn't seem like it's my fault, I would be very grateful, thank you. You might think I'm being sarcastic here, and it would be very on brand for me, but I am being deadly serious about this. I do want to validate that it is okay to walk away from design systems for a time or forever. I have taken a break before, and I think at some point I'll probably do it again. Design systems, contrary to how we sometimes feel and talk about them, are not life, I promise you. You existed before you worked on design systems, and you will continue to exist afterwards. And if you do decide to walk away, I'm fairly sure design systems will still be here when you come back. So yes, you absolutely could quit and pursue a different path. But I think for many of you, the benefits of this work will still probably outweigh its drawbacks. So if we do decide to stay, then how can we better protect ourselves against burnout? Do you remember how at the start of this talk I said that I thought that the key to design systems causing burnout lay in that third component of Freudenberger's definition? That it was just rooted in this decreased sense of accomplishment? Well, I think this is also where we can look for solutions. To really counter that risk of burnout, we have to cultivate a sense of accomplishment. So what does that look like in practice? I want to say burnout is really complex. It's really hard to come back out of. So I don't have a silver bullet here for you, but I do have some suggestions about where to start, 4 to be precise. So we can tell better stories. Sorry, I skipped too far. We can radically de-scope what we're doing. We can celebrate our success often, and we can reconnect to our purpose. And I will go through each one of those in turn. So start with telling better stories. We have to start being more honest about design systems and what they do and don't offer. And I think this is especially important when we're at the pitching stage and we're telling our leadership how much money we can save the company when we're no longer throwing its money down the drain, I'm very tired, down the drain, rebuilding buttons. We like to tell stakeholders that design systems will make duplication of effort a thing of the past. And we talk about that in these very binary terms. We're going to save the organization so much money with common components. But the reality is that while a well-maintained design system will gradually reduce duplication of effort over time, it will never completely stop it from happening. And that's because not every component or pattern will be provided from day one. Not every team will start to use the design system on day one. And fundamentally, because divergence and experimentation is part of the design process, it's an important part of the design process. So it will never completely go away, and nor should it. We also need to move away from this language of single-point delivery. So rather than promising to build a design system, we need to over-communicate the reality of this work, which is that design systems are about using tools and processes and improving inter-organizational relationships to make design and development more efficient. This work is an ongoing practice, and by communicating it in this way, we take pressure off that launch moment and set better expectations. And this might be a harder sell than an oversimplified sales pitch that says design systems will save you 25% of your design and development effort, but it will put us in a much better position to show off the value of the work that we do deliver. So let's move on to radical de-scoping. Now, Coco Chanel famously said, before you leave the house, look in the mirror and take one thing off. And I think we can take inspiration for this with a slight adjustment for design systems. Before you share your roadmap, look at your objectives and take almost every fucking thing off. Now, Ignacia and I ran a workshop yesterday on creating strategies for design systems, which some of you were in, some of you are in this picture. And so those of you that were there, and Ignacia, will back me up when I say that 90% of the work that we do when we're helping people create strategies for design systems is just helping them to narrow their focus. How much we have capacity to concentrate on at any given time depends heavily on the size of our team and the maturity of our design system. But when we're goal setting for design systems, it's a good idea to think about which users we most need to support. which products we most need to serve, which platforms we most need to accommodate, and finally, and most importantly, what we can't commit to. It's a good idea to revisit these questions regularly, at least every quarter, I would say, and be super vigilant against scope creep. Because if I've learned one thing in the past 7 years or so of working in this space, it's that your capacity is always less than you think. And on the subject of goal setting, I am very aware this is not a sexy hot take, but honestly, fuck moonshots. Moonshots came straight from the capitalism playbook, and I hate them. Absolutely fuck aiming for this unattainable vision. All it does is wear us down. And the thing about setting achievable goals is that you actually get to feel a sense of achievement, rather than thinking about all the things that you didn't manage to do. And on that note, something else we can do to shift that emphasis is to celebrate success often. We can all help in these quite simple ways to create a culture of appreciation within our teams by acknowledging each other's wins and calling out good work. I'm a big fan of making sure that there is always space in team retros to talk about what's gone well. When you're in a retro, contribute to this. It's so easy, and I've been guilty of it, of going into the room with a list of things that you want to improve and a list of complaints, but it's equally important to acknowledge what you and your colleagues are getting right. I'm also a really big fan of the practice of honouring our achievements with cake. So this is an example of a glorious showstopper I made for the Gov UK design system when we shipped a bunch of accessibility updates on our 1-year launch anniversary. And maybe this just seems like a small, insignificant, silly thing, but it really does pay to take the time to mark your successes and just to look in the rearview mirror from time to time and be like, yeah, we did good. Have some sugar. And don't just keep this to yourself. Spam Slack with your design system updates. Do a weekly roundup of all of the things that you've done this week. And bask in the dopamine hits that you get when people react with emojis and a torrent of cut and pasted well dones. It may sound like I'm just being flippant here, but celebrating success reminds us to have fun in our work, and I found that its effect is cumulative. Celebrating our wins, even the small ones, lets us top up our emotional bank account. It helps to counteract that burnout that depletes us. So do make time for it, even if it seems frivolous. God, it's very late in the day, isn't it? I'm not drunk, I promise. And the final piece of advice that I'd like to share with you today is to reconnect to your purpose. And I think that this is probably the most important one for me. Design systems have taken on a life of their own. Once just a means to an end, they have become the end itself. Organisations no longer talk in these generic terms about wanting to improve efficiency or make our products more consistent. They just say, we need a design system. But design systems are not one thing. And no matter how many dickhead consultants like me try and sell you an out-of-the-box solution, there is no template answer. Approaching design systems in a formulaic way leaves us with a checklist of artifacts to deliver, and it means that we lose sight of our purpose and why we're doing this work in the first place. But to really feel that sense of accomplishment that's so important to counteract burnout, we need to reconnect to that, both on a personal level and at a team level. So individually, why did you start working in this space in the first place? What itches did it let you scratch? Personally, I care about creating inclusive experiences and helping people to connect with each other, and design systems are just my current best way of doing that. So when I feel burnt out, reminding myself of the decisions that I've made and the work that I've done to help with that goal along the way, it helps me to remember that I am making a difference. And in terms of your team, what motivates you and your colleagues as a collective? What gets you all fired up about this work? What kind of work gives you all meaning? What unites you as a team and gives you shared meaning? What makes you feel like you're part of something bigger? And I think this is key, because I think the best and the worst thing about design systems work is that it connects us to something bigger than ourselves. The reach that we have can feel like a really heavy burden sometimes, but it also helps us to see the things that unite us. And this is where I want to leave you today. Burnout in general sucks. And if you're in this room today, I think the unfortunate truth is that the career path that you've chosen and the type of person that you probably are means that you're probably at a greater risk of burning out than the average. But if I can offer you a word of comfort, it's that you are not alone in that. We are in this together. Thanks, Luke, for this. And I know that when I'm struggling with burnout, a huge part of what pulls me back out of it is the community around me, all of you lot. As systems thinkers, I believe that we are intrinsically kind of smart and capable and empathetic and compassionate people, and our community is one of our strongest tools in our arsenal. We are collectively a force to be reckoned with. And before the urge to break into a terrible rendition of You'll Never Walk Alone fully overtakes me, I will love you and leave you and just say, you've got this, and we've all got you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Amy.